For nearly 1,000 years, Lincoln Cathedral has dominated the skyline of the city of Lincoln and the surrounding areas, and over the centuries it has been the setting for numerous historic events and has spawned many myths and legends. Perhaps the most famous legend is associated with the Lincoln Imp, a tiny grotesque statue that sits high on a pillar in Lincoln Cathedral, which has become the symbol of the city. But I'm here to explore other little-known stories and legends associated with this historic ecclesiastical building. In the 12th century, there was a strange medieval superstition which states that the King of England must not enter the city of Lincoln for fear of calamity. The origin of the superstition has been lost to time, but in the year 1200, King John, one of England's most notorious monarchs, broke the tradition when he paid a visit to Lincoln to receive the homage of William, King of Scotland. Contrary to the advice of his followers, he entered Lincoln Cathedral to place a gold chalice on the altar of John the Baptist, and he was greeted by several abbots of the Cistercian order. The king was in the midst of a power struggle with the church, and having conceived an antipathy against the Cistercians, he was so angered by their presence that he ordered his soldiers to have them put to death in the castle yard. However, the soldiers, perhaps fearing the wrath of God more than that of the king, were unable to carry out his order. Instead, at nightfall, they secretly smuggled the monks out of the city. That night, King John had a terrible nightmare, in which he was beaten and tortured by the spirits of the monks he believed he'd had put to death. On waking, he found he was lacerated from shoulder to hip, and so disturbed was he by this frightful dream that he believed it was a warning from heaven that his soul would be damned unless he made some reparation to the monks. So in 1204, he founded Beaulieu Abbey in Hampshire, one of the last Cistercian abbeys founded in England. He hoped, with this act of generosity, to become the object of prayers in every Cistercian monastery. He even desired to be buried at Beaulieu Abbey, but that didn't happen. John died at Newark Castle in 1216 and was buried in Worcester Cathedral. There is a strange legend attached to two magnificent rose windows that face one another across the north-south transept of the cathedral. The north window is known as the Dean's Eye, and the south window as the Bishop's Eye. They date from the early 13th century, and they are described in the contemporary life of St. Hugh of Lincoln as the two eyes of the church. The north window represents the devil, and the south the Holy Spirit. With these eyes, the cathedral's face is on watch for the lights of heaven and the darkness of oblivion. At the end of the 12th century, an earthquake destroyed much of Lincoln Cathedral, and it was rebuilt in the Gothic style. It is said that when work began in 1192, the design and construction of the two magnificent windows was assigned to a master stonemason and his humble apprentice. The stonemason designed and built the Dean's Eye, a window of great beauty. But his subordinate's work, the Bishop's Eye, proved to be so much finer in conception and execution that besides himself with jealousy, the master flung himself from the scaffold on which he was standing and perished on the floor below. By another account, in his rage he murdered his pupil, and marks of human blood, which can never be washed out, are said to be visible on the cathedral floor. Similar tales are told of an ornate font in St. James Church, Freeston, near Boston, the Prentice Pillar at Roslin Abbey, and the Prentice Window at Melrose, and two rare windows in Rouen Cathedral, in all of which cases the master is said to have murdered his apprentice. The origins of these stories can be traced to the tale of Perdu in Greek mythology, and the murder of Hiram Abiff, the master Freemason who was the principal architect of Solomon's Temple. So it would seem that over the centuries, such legends have spread by word of mouth, and in some locations they have taken root with subtle alterations. In the northeast corner of the Angel Choir are the monuments of the Burghurst family. This fine recumbent effigy is of Henry Burghurst, who was Bishop of Lincoln from 1320 to 1340. He was more of a statesman than a bishop. He joined Queen Isabella, who was known as the She-Wolf of France, in the movement which led to the deposition and grisly murder of her husband, Edward II. Burghurst became Lord Chancellor of England in 1328, and he was described as being neither good for the church, nor state, sovereign, or subjects, but was covetous, ambitious, rebellious, and injurious. He died at Ghent in 1340, and his body was brought to Lincoln and buried near the shrine of St. Hugh in the Angel Choir. Bishop Burghurst had great estates at Fingest, Buckinghamshire, and a tradition arose that his ghost, dressed as a huntsman, was doomed to wander the woodlands he had stolen from the poor. One night he appeared in green, with bow, quiver, and bugle-horn to one of his former friends. He told pitifully that he was now doomed to be park keeper, and asked that the canons of Lincoln should give back the lands. This the canons gladly did, and so the ghostly keeper of episcopal rank was seen no more, and went in peace to his eternal resting place. In medieval superstition, it was widely believed that the soul of a sinful priest was doomed to wander the earth as a spectral huntsman. The superstition derives from the Norse legend of Odin leading the wild hunt across the stormy night skies, seeking the souls of the damned. Henry Burghurst is not the only Bishop of Lincoln to be associated with the supernatural. During the 1100s, William of Newburgh, a monk from Newburgh Abbey, recorded many historic events of 11th and 12th century England. In his 5th chronicle, Historia Rerum Anglicarum, he documents several accounts of revenants, or the walking dead. The medieval scribes of Britain had no name for these supernatural beings. It wasn't until the 18th century that the word vampire was added to the English language. Newburgh chronicled one of the earliest known cases of vampirism in England. The story was related to him by the Archdeacon of Buckinghamshire. In 1192, an unnamed man had died and was buried, but the night after his burial he rose from the grave and returned to his widow. He leapt on her while she slept, nearly crushing her to death with his weight. The same thing happened the following evening, but on the third night the wife gathered friends and family to protect her, and when the vampire appeared, he was driven away. As a result, the creature began attacking other people in the town, as well as animals, and soon every household was forced to stay awake for fear of nocturnal attacks. The local clergy were mystified, and they called upon Bishop Hugh of Lincoln to deal with the terrifying revenant. After consulting other theologians, Bishop Hugh learned that similar attacks had happened elsewhere in England, and he was told that the only way to destroy these creatures was to disinter them from their graves and to burn them to ashes. However, Bishop Hugh found the idea of such a violent desecration distasteful, so instead he wrote out an absolution and told the Archdeacon to open the tomb and to place it on the chest of the body over the heart, and then to reseal the tomb. Hugh believed this act would absolve the vampire from sin and set his soul to rest. When the tomb was opened, the body was found to be incorrupt. The absolution was laid on the corpse, and the vampire was never seen to walk again. These are just a few of the many little-known ecclesiastical stories and legends associated with Lincoln Cathedral. For centuries, these ancient hallowed stones have been a silent witness to wars, plagues, political turmoil, and the trials and tribulations of those who walked the earth before us.